North Texas, spring 1883. The thunderstorm had rolled in from the west, turning afternoon to dusk in minutes. Lightning cracked across the sky as Jacob Caldwell stood on the porch of his ranch house, watching sheets of rain lash against the paddocks. His cattle huddled beneath the scattered oaks, their dark shapes barely visible through the downpour. 20,000 acres of the finest grazing land in Archer County, and not a soul to share it with. Jacob removed his hat, running calloused fingers through hair that had begun graying at the temples despite his 32 years. The rocking sea had been his life for 7 years now, ever since he'd scraped together enough from cattle drives to put a down payment on this spread. The ranch had prospered. Jacob hadn't, not in the ways that mattered. A flicker of movement caught his attention. Eleanor Connolly hurrying across the yard from the cookhouse, a covered dish balanced precariously as she splashed through puddles. She'd arrived 3 months ago, answering his advertisement for a cook after old Pete Johnson had decided his rheumatism couldn't take another Texas winter. Jacob stepped aside as she rushed onto the porch, water streaming from her shawl. "Mr. Caldwell, I've brought your supper," she said, slightly breathless. "Thought you might not want to brave the deluge." "Much obliged, Miss Connolly." Jacob accepted the covered dish, steam escaping from beneath the cloth. "You shouldn't have troubled yourself in this weather." "No trouble," she replied, pushing a strand of auburn hair back beneath her bonnet. "Can't have the boss going hungry, can we?" As she adjusted her shawl, the sleeve of her dress slipped back, revealing a pattern of purple bruises circling her wrist. She quickly tugged the fabric down, but not before Jacob had seen. "Miss Connolly, your arm." "It's nothing," she cut in, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Clumsy me. Caught it in the cupboard door yesterday." The lie hung between them, transparent as glass. Cupboard doors didn't leave finger-shaped marks. "If you'll excuse me, I should get back before the storm worsens." She turned to go, but Jacob's voice stopped her. "Miss Connolly, Eleanor, if there's anything troubling you, my door is always open." She paused, her back to him, shoulders tense beneath her damp shawl. For a moment, he thought she might speak, but instead, she nodded once and hurried back into the rain. Jacob watched her go, unease settling in his stomach alongside the hunger. In the 3 months she'd been at the rocking sea, Eleanor had proven herself not only an excellent cook, but a hard worker with a quick mind and gentle manner. The hands respected her, and even Jacob's foreman, Mitchell, who'd initially balked at having a woman in the cookhouse, had been won over by her apple pies and no-nonsense attitude. She was a mystery, though. A well-spoken, educated woman who'd appeared in Archer County with nothing but a carpetbag and references that checked out but somehow felt incomplete. Jacob had hired her anyway. Good help was hard to find, and there was something in her steady gaze that spoke of reliability. He carried his dinner inside, settling at the kitchen table with the stew she'd prepared. As he ate, his mind kept returning to those bruises and the fear that had flashed across Eleanor's face when he'd noticed them. That night, Jacob lay awake listening to the storm's fury gradually subside, replaced by the steady drip of water from the eaves. By dawn, he'd made a decision. He wouldn't press Eleanor for answers she wasn't ready to give, but he would watch more carefully. And he would wait. Eleanor rose before sunrise as always, stoking the fire in the cookhouse stove and beginning the day's first batch of biscuits. The bruises on her wrists ached as she worked the dough, a painful reminder of the life she'd fled. 3 months at the rocking sea had been the most peaceful time she'd known in years. At 26, she'd resigned herself to spinsterhood after escaping her brief, nightmarish marriage to Harold Whitfield, a banker whose charming public face had hidden a monster. She'd run west, changing her name from Whitfield back to her maiden name, Connolly, terrified Harold would find her, but more terrified of staying. Jacob Caldwell had been a godsend, a fair employer who respected her privacy and valued her work. Eleanor had watched him from afar, admiring his quiet strength and the way he treated his men with respect rather than domination. And now he'd seen the bruises. Old bruises, from before she'd fled, but telling nonetheless. She'd recognized the concern in his eyes, and it frightened her. Not because she feared Jacob, she didn't, but because she feared what would happen if she let anyone close again. The back door creaked open, and Eleanor tensed before recognizing Thomas, the youngest ranch hand, barely 19 and perpetually hungry. "Morning, Miss Connolly," he greeted, hat already in hand. Sorry to trouble you so early, but the boys and I are heading out to the north pasture to check fences after the storm. Wondered if you might have something to tide us over." Eleanor smiled, grateful for the distraction. "Fresh biscuits in 5 minutes, Thomas. Coffee's ready now." By the time the ranch hands had eaten and ridden out, the sun was climbing above the horizon. Eleanor was kneading dough for the midday bread when the cookhouse door opened again. She looked up to find Jacob standing there, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Caldwell," she acknowledged, dusting flour from her hands. "Miss Connolly." He cleared his throat. "I wanted to thank you for last night's supper. Best stew I've had in a long while." "You're welcome, sir." He didn't leave, instead removing his hat and turning it in his hands. "Eleanor, he stopped, seemed to reconsider. "I'm heading into town today. Is there anything you need?" She felt a rush of relief that he wasn't pursuing questions about her bruises. "Some cinnamon would be nice, if Thornton's has it in stock. And perhaps some lemons, if they're not too dear." Jacob nodded. "Consider it done." He hesitated again, then added, "There's a social at the church on Saturday. Dancing, food, the usual affair. The hands were planning to attend. You'd be welcome to join us, if you'd like a change of scenery." The invitation surprised her. I'm not much for socializing, Mr. Caldwell." "Jacob," he corrected gently. "After 3 months, I think we can dispense with formalities when it's just us." A blush crept up her cheeks. "Jacob, then. The offer stands," he said, placing his hat back on his head. "No pressure. Just thought you might enjoy an evening away from the cookhouse." After he'd gone, Eleanor found herself considering his invitation more seriously than she'd expected to. It had been so long since she'd done anything purely for pleasure. Fear had governed her choices for too long, keeping her isolated, watchful. But Archer County was far from Harold's reach, and an evening of music and conversation held its appeal. She had a serviceable dress she could wear, and perhaps just this once, she could allow herself to remember what it felt like to be a normal young woman, not a fugitive. Jacob was surprised but pleased when Eleanor appeared at the ranch house on Saturday evening, dressed in a simple blue calico dress with her hair arranged more carefully than usual. He'd borrowed a wagon from the livery in town, not wanting her to have to ride horseback in a dress. "You look lovely," he said as he helped her onto the seat. "Thank you." She smoothed her skirt nervously. "It's been a while since I've attended any social gatherings." Jacob climbed up beside her. "To be honest, I'm not much for dances myself. But Mitchell insists the men need some civilized entertainment now and then, and I suppose he's right." The drive into Archer City passed pleasantly, with conversation flowing more easily than Jacob had expected. Eleanor proved knowledgeable about literature and even politics, though she demurred when he asked where she'd received her education. The church was lit up with lanterns, fiddle music spilling through the open doors. Inside, tables groaned with food, and couples already circled the floor in a lively reel. Jacob felt a swell of pride walking in with Eleanor, noting how heads turned to observe them. "Jacob Caldwell, as I live and breathe," called Reverend Simmons, approaching with his wife in tow. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "Eleanor Connolly, my cook," Jacob introduced her, watching her extend her hand with practiced grace. "Miss Connolly has been at the Rocking Sea for 3 months now," Jacob added. "Delighted to meet you, my dear," Mrs. Simmons said warmly. "We've heard much about your cooking from the ranch hands when they come to town." Eleanor smiled politely. "All good, I hope." "Exceptional, by all accounts," the Reverend assured her. "Now, do help yourselves to refreshments. Martha Lewis has outdone herself with the punch this year." As the evening progressed, Jacob found himself watching Eleanor more than participating in the festivities himself. She declined most invitations to dance, but accepted one from Thomas, whose earnest entreaty seemed to amuse her. Jacob observed her movements on the floor, graceful, measured, clearly familiar with the steps of proper dancing. He was making his way toward her to request a dance himself when he noticed a newcomer enter the church. A well-dressed man in an expensive suit, perhaps 40, with a gold watch chain stretched across his vest. Something about the stranger set Jacob on edge, perhaps the calculating way his eyes swept the room, or the tight set of his mouth beneath his neatly trimmed mustache. The man's gaze stopped on Eleanor, and a smile spread across his face that sent a chill down Jacob's spine. Jacob changed course, intercepting the stranger before he could approach the dance floor. "Evening," he greeted, extending his hand. Jacob Caldwell. Don't believe I've had the pleasure. The man took Jacob's hand with a grip too tight to be friendly. Harold Whitfield. I've recently arrived from Dallas on business. Banking business? Jacob asked, noting the man's attire. Surprise flickered across Whitfield's face. Indeed. How did you know? Jacob shrugged. Just a guess. What brings a Dallas banker to our humble gathering? I'm searching for someone, actually. Whitfield's eyes drifted past Jacob, back to where Eleanor was finishing her dance with Thomas. And I believe I've found her. Jacob shifted, deliberately blocking Whitfield's line of sight. Anyone I might know? My wife, Whitfield answered, his voice hardening. She's been missing for several months. Family matter, you understand. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Eleanor's bruises. Her reluctance to speak of her past. Her constant wariness. Jacob kept his expression neutral with effort. Sorry to hear that. Hope you find her. Whitfield's smile didn't reach his eyes. Oh, I believe I already have. If you'll excuse me. As Whitfield moved to step around him, Jacob placed a hand firmly on the man's shoulder. Mr. Whitfield, this is a community gathering. I'd hate for any personal matters to disturb the evening. The banker's face darkened. Remove your hand, Mr. Caldwell. What happens between a man and his wife is no concern of yours. When that woman is under my employ and protection, it very much is my concern. Jacob's voice remained low, but iron had entered it. Protection? Whitfield laughed coldly. From her lawful husband? I think you'll find the law disagrees, sir. Before Jacob could respond, Eleanor appeared at his side, her face ashen. Harold, she whispered. Eleanor, my dear. Whitfield's tone changed, becoming solicitous, though his eyes remained hard. You've led me on quite a chase. Jacob felt Eleanor trembling beside him. The music continued, dancers whirling around them, oblivious to the drama unfolding in their midst. I think we should take this conversation outside, Jacob suggested, his hand still on Whitfield's shoulder. An excellent idea, Whitfield agreed. Eleanor, come along. She stays with me, Jacob stated flatly. The banker's facade cracked. She is my wife, you ignorant cowman. Unless you want the sheriff charging you with abduction, you'll stand aside. Eleanor found her voice at last. I am not going anywhere with you, Harold. Despite her fear, she stood straight, chin raised. Not ever again. People nearby had begun to notice the confrontation, conversations faltering as heads turned in their direction. Now listen here, Whitfield began, reaching for Eleanor's arm. Jacob moved faster, catching the man's wrist in a vice-like grip. No, you listen. Whatever claim you think you have on Miss Connolly ends here. Tonight. It's Mrs. Whitfield, Harold snarled. And if you don't unhand me this instant, I'll have you arrested for assault. Is there a problem here, gentlemen? Sheriff Donovan had materialized beside them, his weathered face grave beneath his mustache. This rancher is preventing me from claiming my runaway wife, Whitfield said, straightening his jacket. I'd like him arrested for interference in a family matter. The sheriff turned to Eleanor. Ma'am, is this man your husband? Eleanor took a deep breath. He is, Sheriff. But I left him because of this. She pulled back her sleeve, revealing the fading bruises. And these are only the most recent marks. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Domestic disputes were private matters in the West, but there were limits to what decent folk would countenance. That's unfortunate, ma'am, the sheriff said, genuine sympathy in his voice. But the law is clear on marriage. If this man is your lawful husband, then perhaps we should discuss what the law says about assault, Jacob interrupted. And how many witnesses saw Mr. Whitfield attempt to grab Miss Connolly just now? The sheriff frowned, caught between conflicting principles. Mr. Whitfield, I suggest you find accommodation in town tonight. We can sort this out in the morning with cooler heads. This is outrageous, Whitfield sputtered. I demand. You can demand all you want at my office tomorrow. Sheriff Donovan cut him off. For now, I'm asking you to leave peacefully before I decide you're disturbing the public order. The banker glared at them all, his composure slipping to reveal the rage beneath. This isn't over, he warned, his eyes fixed on Eleanor. You're still my wife under the law, and no backwater sheriff or cattle baron can change that. After Whitfield had stormed out, the sheriff turned to Jacob and Eleanor. I bought you some time, but he's not wrong about the law. A wife is her husband's property, legally speaking. She's not property, Jacob growled. She's a person who's been abused. I don't disagree, Donovan sighed, but my hands are tied. Unless. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. There might be one option. Whitfield can only claim his wife if she's still legally his wife. Eleanor frowned. What do you mean? I mean divorce, Mrs. Whitfield. On grounds of cruelty. Judge Parker rides circuit through here next week. He's a fair man. Might be sympathetic to your situation. A divorce would take months, Jacob objected. Whitfield won't wait that long. No, the sheriff agreed. But a divorce petition might stay his hand. And if you had another protector with a legal claim in the meantime? His meaningful look made his suggestion clear. Jacob turned to Eleanor, whose eyes had widened in understanding. I should get Miss Connolly back to the ranch, Jacob said to the sheriff. We'll discuss this option. The social was effectively over for them. As they drove back to the rocking sea in tense silence, Jacob's mind raced through possibilities, none of them perfect. Finally, Eleanor broke the quiet. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Harold. You've nothing to apologize for, Jacob assured her. I suspected you were running from something, but it wasn't my place to pry. I thought I'd be safe here. Her voice was small in the darkness. That he wouldn't find me. He hasn't won yet, Jacob said firmly. I meant what I told him. You're under my protection now. Jacob, she said softly. You know what the sheriff was suggesting. He kept his eyes on the road. I do. And I want you to know I would never presume. That is, it would be an arrangement in name only, until you're free of him legally. You'd marry me? Just to protect me from Harold? The disbelief in her voice stung more than Jacob expected. Is that so hard to believe? He asked, reining the horses to a stop as they reached the ranch. Eleanor, He turned to face her in the moonlight. These past 3 months, having you here has been. I've come to care for you. More than I should, perhaps, as your employer. Her sharp intake of breath was audible in the still night air. Jacob, I can't ask this of you. Marriage isn't something to enter into lightly, even as a pretense. Who said anything about pretense? The words escaped before he could consider them. Eleanor, I'm not offering out of pity or obligation. If circumstances were different, I'd court you properly. Give you time to know your own mind. But we don't have that luxury now. She studied his face, searching for sincerity. You can't mean that. I've never meant anything more, he said quietly. But I understand if you don't feel the same. We'll find another way to keep you safe, if that's the case. Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears. It's not that, she whispered. I've watched you too these months. Your kindness, your strength. But I'm afraid, Jacob. Afraid of belonging to another man, even one as good as you. You wouldn't belong to me, he corrected gently. We would belong to each other. Partners, Eleanor. Equals. She didn't answer immediately, and Jacob didn't press. He helped her down from the wagon and walked her to the cookhouse door. Think on it, he said. Whatever you decide, I'll respect your choice. And I'll keep you safe, one way or another. He left her there, returning to the main house with a heart fuller and heavier than it had been in years. Eleanor barely slept, Harold's appearance and Jacob's proposal tumbling through her mind in endless circles. By dawn, she had reached a decision. She found Jacob in the stables, already preparing to ride out with his men. When he saw her, he dismissed the others with a nod. I've thought about what you said, Eleanor began, her hands clasped tightly before her. About marriage. Jacob set down the saddle he'd been holding. And I'll accept on one condition. She met his gaze steadily. That it be a real marriage, Jacob, not just a legal shield. His expression shifted from surprise to something warmer, more intense. Eleanor, are you certain? After what you've been through, because of what I've been through, she corrected. I won't live half a life any longer, ruled by fear. If I'm to be your wife, I want to be your wife in truth. In time, she added, a blush coloring her cheeks. Jacob closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. Nothing would make me happier, he said, his voice rough with emotion. But we should move quickly. Whitfield won't wait long. How quickly, she asked. Today, he answered. If you're willing. What followed was a flurry of activity that set the entire ranch abuzz. Jacob sent his fastest rider, young Thomas, to fetch Reverend Simmons and Sheriff Donovan. Mitchell, the foreman, was dispatched to town to secure a marriage license and spread word that anyone who wished to attend a wedding at the Rocking Sea was welcome by noon. Eleanor retreated to her small room behind the cookhouse, overcome with the speed of events. She had one good dress besides the blue calico, a green muslin she'd rarely worn since fleeing Dallas. As she changed, she confronted her reflection in the small mirror. Was she mad to agree to this? To leap from one marriage directly into another? But Jacob wasn't Harold. Every instinct told her that, every observation from their months together. Jacob's strength didn't manifest as domination. His authority wasn't tyranny. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Eleanor. It was Mrs. Peterson, wife of one of the neighboring ranchers. May I come in? Eleanor opened the door to find not only Mrs. Peterson, but 3 other women from nearby homesteads. We heard the news, Mrs. Peterson said, smiling broadly. Thought you might want some help preparing. And we brought this, added Mrs. Turner, unwrapping a package to reveal a crown of white flowers. Every bride should have something special. Tears sprang to Eleanor's eyes at the unexpected kindness. Thank you, she managed. I wasn't expecting any of this. That Jacob Caldwell has been alone too long, Mrs. Peterson declared, bustling in to help arrange Eleanor's hair. The whole county's been wondering what it would take for him to finally settle down. Should have known it would be someone special. By noon, the Rocking Sea's front yard had been transformed. Ranch hands had constructed a simple arbor, decorated with wildflowers gathered from the surrounding prairie. Wagons and horses filled the yard as townsfolk and neighboring ranchers arrived, many bringing food or small gifts. Jacob had changed into his best suit, a dark wool that Eleanor had seen only at funerals before today. He stood beneath the arbor with Reverend Simmons and Sheriff Donovan, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. When Eleanor emerged from the cookhouse, escorted by Mitchell's wife, a hush fell over the gathered crowd. The simplicity of her dress was offset by the crown of white flowers, and she carried a small bouquet of bluebonnets, hastily gathered by the children of the neighboring families. Jacob's face as she approached would stay with her forever, wonder and joy and something deeper, something that made her heart race despite her lingering fears. The ceremony was brief, the traditional words exchanged with quiet intensity. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Jacob hesitated only a moment before leaning down to place a gentle kiss on Eleanor's lips, their first. A cheer went up from the assembled guests, followed by music as someone produced a fiddle. Tables appeared, laden with food contributed by the guests, and the wedding became an impromptu celebration that stretched into the afternoon. Sheriff Donovan approached them during the festivities. Congratulations, he said, shaking Jacob's hand. I filed the marriage certificate myself. It's all legal and binding. What about Whitfield? Jacob asked quietly. He was at the hotel when I left town, looking like thunder. My deputy's keeping an eye on him. The sheriff lowered his voice further. I sent a telegram to Dallas this morning. Made some inquiries about our Mr. Whitfield. Eleanor tensed. What did you learn? Nothing concrete yet, but there are rumors. Seems his first wife died under questionable circumstances, and there have been whispers about his business practices. Donovan straightened. Point is, he may not be as respectable as he appears. Might give us leverage if he tries to cause trouble. Jacob's arm tightened around Eleanor's waist. Thank you, Sheriff. Just doing my job, Donovan replied. But word of advice, don't let your guard down just yet. They didn't have long to wait. As the celebration was winding down, a cloud of dust on the road announced riders approaching. Harold Whitfield came into view, accompanied by 2 men who had the hard look of hired guns. Jacob moved Eleanor behind him as Whitfield dismounted and strode toward them, rage evident in every line of his body. What is the meaning of this farce? He demanded, waving a paper. The hotel clerk informed me my wife has supposedly married this rancher. Ex-wife, Jacob corrected calmly. As of this morning, Eleanor is Mrs. Caldwell, legally wed with witnesses and proper documentation. Impossible, Whitfield spluttered. She cannot marry while still bound to me. Sheriff Donovan stepped forward. According to Texas law, Mr. Whitfield, abandonment for over 3 months constitutes grounds for divorce. Mrs. Caldwell has not resided with you for at least that long, by her testimony and yours. I did not abandon her. She ran away. Semantics, the sheriff replied with a shrug. The law doesn't specify who left whom, only that the marriage was effectively dissolved through extended separation. It was a legal fiction, of course, one that might not stand up to scrutiny in a proper court. But in this remote corner of Texas, with a sympathetic local lawman, and a community clearly supporting the new couple, Whitfield found himself outmaneuvered. "This is preposterous," he snarled, turning his venom on Eleanor. "You think you can humiliate me like this? I'll contest this sham marriage. I'll have it annulled." "You're welcome to try," Jacob replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "But consider this, Whitfield. Every person here has witnessed your behavior today. Every person here knows what kind of man treats a woman so that she flees halfway across the state." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the remaining guests. Several of Jacob's ranch hands had moved closer, hands resting casually near their weapons. "Furthermore," Jacob continued, "Sheriff Donovan has been making inquiries in Dallas. Seems you might have secrets you'd prefer not to have examined too closely." Whitfield blanched slightly at this, his eyes darting to the sheriff. "So here's what's going to happen," Jacob said. "You're going to leave my property and my wife alone. You're going to return to Dallas and forget you ever knew Eleanor. Because if you don't, I promise you'll face consequences far beyond a failed marriage." For a moment, it seemed Whitfield might explode with rage. His hand twitched toward his coat, where a weapon might be concealed. "I wouldn't," Sheriff Donovan warned quietly. "Not with 20 witnesses and me standing right here." The banker's self-control reasserted itself with visible effort. "This isn't over," he said, his voice trembling with suppressed fury. "No backwater justice of the peace can dissolve a proper marriage." "Perhaps not," Eleanor spoke up, stepping out from behind Jacob. "But Judge Isaac Parker can. He'll be here next week on circuit, and I'll be filing formal divorce papers with witnesses to your abuse. How will that look to your banking associates, Harold? To have your cruelty made public record?" Whitfield's face contorted. "You wouldn't dare." "I already have," she replied steadily. "The papers are drawn up. All they need is the judge's signature." It was another bluff, but a calculated one. Judge Parker's reputation as the hanging judge of the Western Territories preceded him. He was known to have little patience for men who abused their power, whether outlaws or those who considered themselves above the law. Whitfield's gaze swept the assembled crowd, measuring his options. Finally, he turned on his heel. "You'll regret this," he spat. "Both of you." They watched him mount his horse and ride away, his hired men following after exchanging uncertain glances. "He'll be back," Sheriff Donovan predicted grimly. "Men like that don't accept defeat easily." "We'll be ready," Jacob assured him. "And we'll have those divorce papers waiting for Judge Parker when he arrives." As the remaining guests departed with final congratulations, Jacob and Eleanor found themselves alone on the porch of what was now their shared home. The reality of their hasty marriage settled around them in the gathering dusk. "Are you all right?" Jacob asked softly. Eleanor looked up at him, emotions warring in her expression. "It happened so quickly. This morning I was your cook, and now you're still the woman I've come to admire more than any other," he finished for her. "The circumstances may be unusual, but my feelings aren't, Eleanor." She placed her hand on his arm. "I need time, Jacob. To adjust. To trust again." "We have all the time in the world," he promised. "I meant what I said before. This marriage is real to me, but I'll never rush you or demand anything you're not ready to give." Eleanor's smile was tentative but genuine. "Thank you." That night, Jacob insisted Eleanor take the main bedroom while he slept in the small guest room down the hall. It was a gesture of respect that meant more to Eleanor than any passionate declaration could have. The week that followed was one of adjustment and vigilance. Jacob doubled the watches around the ranch, unwilling to risk Whitfield attempting something under cover of darkness. Eleanor continued her duties as cook, but now joined Jacob for meals in the main house, the two of them gradually growing more comfortable in each other's company. Small changes appeared around the ranch. Jacob cleared space in his office for Eleanor's few books. She rearranged the kitchen to better suit her methods. They began tentatively planning improvements to the house that had been neglected during Jacob's bachelor years. Judge Parker arrived in Archer City the following Tuesday, and Eleanor and Jacob rode in together to present their case. The judge was a formidable figure, known for his strict interpretation of the law, but also for his protection of those society often left vulnerable. "Mrs. Caldwell, or should I say Mrs. Whitfield," the judge began after reviewing their petition. "Caldwell," Eleanor stated firmly. "I am married to Jacob Caldwell now." The judge raised an eyebrow. "So I understand." Though the legality of that union, while you remain married to Mr. Whitfield, is precisely the question before me. Sheriff Donovan, who had joined them, cleared his throat. Your Honor, I took the liberty of requesting information from the Dallas authorities regarding Mr. Whitfield. The reply arrived this morning. He handed over a telegram. Judge Parker read it, his expression growing grave. I see. Mr. Whitfield appears to be under investigation for financial irregularities at his bank. And there are other matters of concern. What matters? Jacob asked. His first wife's death has been reopened for investigation. The judge answered, setting down the telegram. It seems Mrs. Caldwell is not the first woman to suffer at his hands. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, a mixture of vindication and sorrow washing over her. I suspected as much. There were rumors among the ladies in Dallas, but nothing was ever proven. Judge Parker studied her thoughtfully. Mrs. Caldwell, are you prepared to testify to your treatment at Mr. Whitfield's hands? It would require speaking of painful matters. I am, she answered without hesitation. If it means freedom from him, I'll tell whatever truths are necessary. The judge nodded. Very well. I'll hear your petition formally tomorrow. Given the circumstances and the evidence of abuse, I'm inclined to grant an expedited divorce. As for your current marriage, he paused, his stern face softening slightly. The law can be a blunt instrument, but it exists to protect the innocent as well as punish the guilty. If Mr. Whitfield is proven to be the man these reports suggest, I see no reason why your current union should not stand. Relief flooded through Eleanor. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me yet, he warned. Mr. Whitfield may still contest these proceedings. Is he in town? Not that we've seen, Sheriff Donovan replied. He left after the wedding, though I half expected him to return for the circuit court. Stay vigilant, Judge Parker advised. Men who abuse their wives rarely surrender their control willingly. They rode back to the ranch in better spirits, but Jacob increased the night watch nonetheless. That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a newfound ease between them. What will you do? Jacob asked suddenly. If the judge grants the divorce and confirms our marriage, will you stay on as cook, or? Eleanor considered the question. I hadn't thought beyond securing my freedom, she admitted. But I suppose as your wife, my place would be here, managing the household. You could do whatever makes you happy, Jacob offered. If cooking for a dozen hungry cowboys brings you joy, continue. If you'd prefer to focus on the house or pursue other interests, that's your choice. She turned to study his profile in the fading light. Do you know how rare a man you are, Jacob Caldwell? To consider a wife's happiness as something separate from her duties? He smiled slightly. Not rare. Just fortunate enough to have been raised by a mother who taught me the value of a woman's mind and spirit, not just her ability to keep house. Eleanor felt a surge of affection for this man who had risked so much to protect her. Impulsively, she leaned over and kissed his cheek. Thank you. For everything. The surprise and pleasure in his eyes emboldened her further. When he cautiously reached for her hand, she twined her fingers with his, the simple contact more intimate than any they'd shared before. They might have remained that way longer, but the sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the peaceful moment. Jacob was on his feet instantly, hand going to the revolver at his hip. Get inside, he told Eleanor, his voice brooking no argument. She hurried to obey, watching through the window as Jacob's foreman, Mitchell, rode into the yard at a gallop. Trouble, boss, Mitchell called, dismounting. Whitfield's in town, drunk and making threats. He's gathered some men, not locals, hired guns by the look of them. Jacob's expression hardened. How many? 6, including Whitfield. They were at the saloon when I left, but they were asking directions to the ranch. Jacob nodded grimly. Get the men together. Anyone not on essential duties. And send Thomas to alert the sheriff. As Mitchell rode to gather the hands, Jacob returned to the house, finding Eleanor waiting in the parlor, her face pale but composed. Harold's coming, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Jacob checked his revolver, then went to the cabinet where he kept a shotgun. I want you to go upstairs and stay there, no matter what you hear. Eleanor shook her head. I won't hide while you risk your life for me. Eleanor, no, Jacob. Her voice was firm. I've spent too long being afraid. Whatever happens, we face it together. He looked as though he might argue, but then his expression softened. Together, then. But promise me you'll stay inside, at least. She nodded her agreement. What's your plan? Depends on what Whitfield intends. If he's just coming to talk, threatening legal action, that's one thing. But if he's brought men looking for a fight, Jacob's jaw tightened. Then we'll give them one they won't forget. By nightfall, the ranch was prepared. Jacob's men, 11 in total, had positioned themselves strategically around the main house and outbuildings. The women who worked at the ranch, the housekeeper and Mitchell's wife, had been sent to a neighbor's property for safety. The waiting was the worst part. Every distant sound had them tensing, every shadow moving in the moonlight drawing their attention. It was nearly midnight when they finally heard the unmistakable approach of multiple riders. Stay back from the windows, Jacob warned, moving to the door. Mitchell, Davis, with me. The rest of you hold positions. Eleanor watched from the shadows as Jacob stepped onto the porch, shotgun held casually but ready. Mitchell and Davis flanked him, rifles in hand. Harold Whitfield's voice carried clearly through the night air. Caldwell, send out my wife, and we can end this peacefully. There's no one here by that name, Jacob called back. Mrs. Caldwell and I are retiring for the evening, so unless you have legitimate business, I suggest you move along. The moonlight revealed Whitfield and his men arrayed in a loose semicircle before the house. Whitfield himself swayed slightly in the saddle, confirming Mitchell's assessment of his drunken state. Don't play games with me, rancher, Whitfield snarled. That woman is my lawful wife, and I've come to claim her. The judge will be hearing from my lawyers tomorrow. Feel free to make your case in court, Jacob replied evenly. For now, you're trespassing on private property. I'm asking you politely to leave. One of Whitfield's men muttered something, causing the others to laugh. A hard, ugly sound. I tried reason, Whitfield said, his voice slurring slightly. I tried the law. Now we do this my way. He drew a pistol from his coat. Last chance, Caldwell. Send Eleanor out, or we burn this place to the ground with you in it. Jacob's posture didn't change, but his voice took on an edge that sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. That would be a serious mistake, Whitfield. I have 11 armed men surrounding you. The sheriff has been notified, and Judge Parker takes a very dim view of arson and attempted murder. Whitfield's response was to fire a shot that splintered the porch railing near Jacob's head. What followed was chaos. Jacob and his men dove for cover as Whitfield's hired guns opened fire. Eleanor crouched behind a heavy oak desk, heart pounding as bullets shattered windows and thudded into the walls of the house. The ranch hands returned fire from their positions, the crack of rifles and revolvers creating a deafening cacophony. Through a broken window, Eleanor saw one of Whitfield's men fall from his horse, clutching his shoulder. Eleanor. Jacob had made his way back inside and was crawling toward her. Are you hit? No, she assured him, raising her voice above the gunfire. Jacob, this has to stop. Men will die tonight because of me. Because of Whitfield, he corrected grimly. Not you. A lull in the shooting was followed by Whitfield's voice again. I've got coal oil here, Caldwell. Your precious ranch will be ashes by morning unless you surrender the woman. Jacob's face hardened. Stay down, he ordered, then moved back toward the door. Wait. Eleanor caught his arm. Let me talk to him. Absolutely not, Jacob said flatly. He's drunk and armed. I won't risk you. He won't shoot me, she insisted. He wants to possess me, not kill me. And I can keep him talking until the sheriff arrives. Jacob shook his head. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than letting him burn down your home, your livelihood. Eleanor held his gaze. Trust me, Jacob. I know Harold better than anyone. Let me try to end this without more bloodshed. The conflict in his eyes was plain, but finally, he nodded. You stay on the porch, in the shadows. I'll be right beside you. At the first sign of trouble, we retreat inside. Agreed. Agreed. They moved cautiously to the door. Jacob signaled to his men to hold their fire, then called out, Whitfield, my wife wishes to speak with you. Any man who raises a weapon toward her dies. Is that understood? A moment of silence followed, then Whitfield's reply. Let her come forward where I can see her. I'm here, Harold. Eleanor called, staying in the shadows of the porch as agreed. There's been enough violence tonight. Eleanor. Whitfield's tone changed, becoming cajoling. Come home, my dear. All will be forgiven. This unfortunate episode can be put behind us. I am home, she replied steadily. My place is here now, with my husband. Whitfield's facade cracked. Husband? That dirt farmer who probably can't even read? You belong in Dallas, in society, at my side. Your side. Eleanor's voice rose. Where you can beat me when you're angry. Where I'm nothing more than property to be controlled and displayed. No, Harold. I've found a man who sees me as a partner, not a possession. You ungrateful whore. Whitfield spat, all pretense abandoned. After everything I gave you. Bruises? She interrupted. Fear? Is that what you think I should be grateful for? In the distance, Eleanor heard what she'd been waiting for, the sound of multiple riders approaching fast. The sheriff's posse had finally arrived. Whitfield heard it too. This isn't over, he threatened, wheeling his horse around. No woman makes a fool of me and lives to boast of it. As he raised his arm, moonlight glinted on metal. He had drawn his pistol again. Jacob shoved Eleanor aside as a shot rang out. Eleanor screamed, certain Jacob had been hit. But it was Harold who slumped in his saddle, a dark stain spreading across his chest. Sheriff Donovan rode into the yard, rifle still raised. Drop your weapons, he ordered Whitfield's remaining men. Or join your employer. The hired guns, seeing themselves now outnumbered by both the ranch hands and the sheriff's posse, wisely surrendered. Eleanor rushed to Jacob, checking frantically for injuries. Are you hit? Are you hurt? I'm fine, he assured her, pulling her close. It's over, Eleanor. It's over. Harold Whitfield was dead before the doctor arrived from town. The sheriff's shot had been true, striking him directly in the heart. His men were taken into custody, facing charges of attempted murder and destruction of property. Couldn't have happened to a more deserving man. Sheriff Donovan commented as Whitfield's body was loaded into a wagon for transport to town. The telegram from Dallas confirmed he was about to be indicted for embezzlement. And there's strong evidence he poisoned his first wife when she threatened to expose him. He won't hurt anyone else, Jacob said, his arm around Eleanor's shoulders. No, he won't. The sheriff tipped his hat to them. Judge Parker will want statements from you both tomorrow, but I don't foresee any complications. As far as the law is concerned, this was a clear case of defending life and property against armed assailants. After the sheriff and his men departed, taking the prisoners and Whitfield's body with them, Jacob and Eleanor surveyed the damage to their home. Broken windows, bullet holes in the walls, splintered furniture, but the structure stood, and no one on their side had been seriously injured. We can repair it, Jacob said, following Eleanor's gaze around the damaged parlor. All of it. I know. She turned to him, eyes bright with unshed tears. I'm so sorry for bringing this to your door, Jacob. Don't. He cupped her face gently. You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. The emotion of the night caught up with Eleanor then, and she began to tremble. Jacob gathered her into his arms, holding her as the tears finally came. I thought he would kill you, she whispered against his chest, when he raised that gun. But he didn't, Jacob soothed, stroking her hair. We're both here. We're both safe. She looked up at him, vulnerability and something deeper shining in her tear-streaked face. I can't lose you, Jacob. Not when I've just found you. The kiss that followed was nothing like the chaste one they'd shared at their wedding. This was a meeting of souls who had faced death together and emerged on the other side, bound by something stronger than mere circumstance or convenience. When they finally parted, breathless, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Eleanor Caldwell. I think I have since the day you arrived, soaking wet from the rain with that covered dish in your hands. She smiled through her tears. And I love you, Jacob Caldwell, more than I thought I could ever love again. 1 year later, the anniversary of their wedding dawned clear and bright, a perfect June day on the Rocking Sea Ranch. The past year had brought changes, some visible, like the new wing added to the ranch house and the expanded herd grazing in the north pasture, others less tangible but no less significant. Eleanor stood on the porch, watching as Jacob instructed Thomas in the finer points of breaking a particularly stubborn colt. At 20, the young man had become almost a son to them, his earnest dedication and quick mind making him Jacob's natural protege. The ranch had prospered under their joint stewardship. Eleanor had proven to have a keen head for business, taking over the account books and suggesting innovations that increased both productivity and profit. Jacob, freed from some of the administrative burdens, had expanded their breeding program, producing horses and cattle that commanded premium prices at market. But the greatest changes had been personal. The tentative affection between them had blossomed into a deep, abiding love, built on mutual respect and shared experience. The small guest room where Jacob had initially slept had been converted into a nursery, awaiting the child Eleanor now carried beneath her heart. Judge Parker had made their marriage officially legal after Harold's death, though in truth, they had considered themselves truly wed since that first night they had faced danger together. Eleanor's divorce had been granted posthumously, clearing any potential clouds from her union with Jacob. As she watched her husband ride toward the house, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a terrified woman fleeing abuse to the confident mistress of a thriving ranch, mother-to-be, and beloved wife. It was a transformation she could scarcely have imagined that day she'd first arrived at the rocking sea, seeking only sanctuary and honest work. Jacob dismounted, handing the reins to Thomas before joining her on the porch. "How are my two favorite people this morning?" he asked, placing a gentle hand on her rounded belly. "Hungry," Eleanor replied with a smile. "Both of us. Well, we can't have that." He leaned down to kiss her, his touch reverent as always. Mitchell's wife brought over a blackberry cobbler, said it was an anniversary gift. "The whole county has been finding excuses to deliver food since they learned about the baby," Eleanor laughed. "As if I've forgotten how to cook." "They care about you," Jacob said simply. "About us. That's worth more than all the cattle in Texas." Eleanor nodded, leaning into his embrace. "I was just thinking about everything that's happened. How close we came to never having this." "But we did," he reminded her. "And we always will." As they stood together in the golden morning light, the future stretching before them like the vast Texas horizon, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just safety, but joy. Not just a protector, but a partner. Not just a home, but a heart to match her own. The lonely rancher and his bruised cook had shocked the town with their sudden marriage. But they had transformed scandal into something beautiful, a love story that would be told in Archer County for generations to come.